All right, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're exploring a seriously fascinating theological perspective on human identity and self-worth. You know, if you've ever struggled with how you view yourself, and let's be real, who hasn't? Or if you're just totally exhausted by that constant pressure to measure up to society's impossible standards, well, this analysis is going to be incredibly relevant for you. The source material we're unpacking today uses this absolutely powerful metaphor. It compares human identity to a priceless, breathtaking work of art that over time has just been covered up by layers of tarnish and dirt. So we're going to examine exactly what that means, where all this crud actually comes from, and most importantly, how that original masterpiece can be uncovered.
But first, to set our metaphorical stage here, I want to ask you a question. Who determines what a masterpiece is actually worth? I mean, is it the art critic? Is it the passing crowd in a gallery? Or is it the artist who literally mixed the paints and applied the brushstrokes? According to the theological text we're analyzing today, when it comes to human value, the absolute only appraisal that actually matters comes straight from the Creator. So, we're going to unpack how this source argues that true human value doesn't originate from our performance or, our popularity, but inherently from our origin.
So, let's move into Section 1, the pristine canvas, humanity as the pinnacle of creation.
The author starts by setting this massive cosmic stage. Just think about the sheer marvel of nature for a second, from sweeping landscapes and violent storms to the mind-boggling complexity of cellular and organ systems. It's an incredibly beautiful system, right? But, as we'll see, it was only the backdrop. Notice how the text carefully differentiates between the rest of nature and humanity. According to the Genesis account referenced by the source, all the greatness and beauty of the cosmos, the stars, the oceans, the animals, was simply pronounced good. But humanity? Humanity was the final touch. The text points out that not until God created man did he consider his creation very good. You see, in this framework, humans are positioned as the literal centerpiece, specially created in the image of God to be in fellowship with him, completely distinct from every other life form. You essentially were the final, perfecting stroke on the canvas.
Which brings us to Section 2, the vandalized art, the corruption of the canvas.
Now you might be wondering, if humanity was made perfect and given dominion over the earth, why do things look so messy today? Well, the text introduces the concept of the fall, arguing that an enemy deceived humanity and as a result, God's beautiful canvas was forever corrupted. This leads to this strikingly visceral quote right here. There are layers of crud and filth brushed over God's beautiful work. And the author isn't just talking about the world at large here, they are talking about you, personally. The argument is that God meticulously formed you to be his masterpiece with a perfect plan for your life, but the effects of Satan, sin, and a fallen world have actively corrupted that beauty. This crud represents the profound emotional and spiritual damage that's literally hiding the original masterpiece underneath.
And this brings us to a really sharp critique regarding how modern society handles all this crud. The source argues that the world's self-esteem movement actually conditions us to embrace the vandalized painting. It points out that societal and progressive pressures often push people to take pride in what the text explicitly labels as perversion, depravity, and decadence. It's essentially having pride in the vandalism itself. Now contrast this with godly esteem. The text argues that true self-worth should never ever be rooted in a corrupted state, but rather in esteeming who God originally created us to be, the uncorrupted, intended work of art.
Let's look at Section 3, the Master Restorer, redemption through Christ.
Thankfully, the text doesn't just leave us covered in filth, it points directly to a solution: redemption through Jesus Christ. The author notes that God knows your inherent beauty. He can see right past that veneer of corruption and damage, and he thought this masterpiece was so incredibly valuable that he sent his Son to redeem and restore it back to perfection. So, what does this ultimate restoration actually look like in practice? Well, the text describes it as actively peeling off the layers of emotional and spiritual junk that the enemy has secretly, and let's be honest, sometimes not so secretly, added to your canvas. But the author highlights a massive challenge here. Many redeemed people struggle because they just can't see past the corruption. Because they hate the veneer of filth, they mistakenly end up hating the masterpiece underneath it too. The source calls this a travesty and challenges believers to really learn to accept the good that God made with intention.
Just one. The source makes a really bold theological assertion here to emphasize human worth. It points out that God chose just one specific type of place to dwell. He wasn't pleased to live in a grand house made of wood and stone. Nope. Instead, he chose to live inside of humanity. Believers are described as his temple. Just take a second to think about the sheer magnitude of that claim based on the text. God not only made and redeemed you, but he considers you worthy of his actual habitation. Wow. Because of this, the text rapidly outlines a staggering list of inherited traits and promises for the believer. Listen to these biblical guarantees of identity. You are inseparable from God's love, overwhelmingly conquering according to Romans 8. You are officially designated a child of God. You are guaranteed an eternal inheritance. 2 Corinthians declares you are made entirely new. And Ephesians states you are chosen, lavished upon, and seated with Him. The source is making it crystal clear here. Your identity is not up for debate. It is totally defined and settled by God with these ironclad promises.
And the source traces this incredible promise of redemption through a historical, biblical timeline. It started way back with the Abrahamic covenant, establishing a specific people. Then, the Mosaic covenant with the sons of Israel. The text acknowledges these people were imperfect, but God used them to introduce step 3, the new covenant through Jesus Christ. Under this new covenant, the immense blessings and identity that were once reserved for a specific ancient nation were wildly expanded to include all people of all times who were willing to receive this great offer of redemption.
Moving on to Section 4, the true appraisal, rejecting worldly metrics of worth.
Okay, so now that the text has established this incredibly high intrinsic value for humanity, how do we actually measure our worth today? Well, the source argues we must radically reject worldly metrics. The text defines worldly worth as value mistakenly derived from incredibly fragile sources. Think fleeting cultural fads, societal expectations of beauty or size, intelligence, wealth, or even just trying to be cool. The author warns that these society-sanctioned molds vary widely with time and culture. I mean, what's vogue today is going to be taboo tomorrow, right? Basing your identity on these fickle opinions or on how others treat you is basically a recipe for disaster, because it completely distracts you from what God actually intended.
And this illustrates the brutal day-to-day conflict we face. We so often appropriate our worth based on earthly rejection. If we experience an unloving family, a lack of friends, being picked last, or going through a painful breakup or divorce, we tend to believe the lie that we're worthless. But the source insists we must look at a totally different reality. We must never form our opinions about ourselves based on the actions of broken people. Your identity is settled by the Creator, making you inherently priceless, completely regardless of any earthly rejection.
Because ultimately, as the text states perfectly right here, God values the inner person, the heart and character, eminently more than the outward. The author really encourages profound contentment in your own skin. Now, the text does make a very careful distinction here. It says, personal goals like, getting an education, learning a trade, or getting in shape are perfectly fine self-improvement goals to voluntarily work toward. But they absolutely do not change your core worth before God. Your inherent value is completely separate from your outward abilities or appearances.
We've covered a tremendous amount of profound material today, exploring how the source views us as literal masterpieces, temporarily buried under the crud of a fallen world, but completely redeemed and valued by the Creator. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. Based on everything we've looked at today, will you continue to let a fickle, constantly changing world appraise your value? Or will you accept the appraisal of the artist who meticulously created you? That elusive, victorious life the text talks about is yours for the taking, but first, you have to realize just how valuable you truly are. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep seeking the truth behind the masterpiece.